My name is Amy Kochek with Amy Kochek Creative. I am a writing coach, I'm a speaker, I'm a ghostwriter. I am all things story related because I believe that the most powerful asset that you have in your life is your story. And I say this all the time, but in my time working with my clients and just talking to people, so many people have very fascinating stories, but they're not sharing them. And there's a variety of reasons, a lot of times when we're thinking about our story, we don't think that our story is as relevant as other people's, or we've lived it, so we don't think it's as phenomenal as it is. But what I've discovered is that the more that I do these shows and the more that I'm able to hear other people's stories, how powerful these have been, not only to me, but to the people who have listened. So I am so excited that you're here today because these stories never disappoint. And I am especially excited and grateful and just 100% so thankful to have my guest on today. His name is Barry Brandon, and he's going to share a really phenomenal story. And I don't know that we've had this lane of story yet, so I'm really excited. You're kind of like our pioneer for this one. But I am so excited to have him on. So Barry, I want you to start off, just kind of introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And any other relevant information you want to share.
Sure. This is the question that I think myself and probably so many people in the world like answering least, right? Like how to summarize our own selves in like 30 seconds or less.
Right.
My name is Barry Brandon on social media. I'm as of like last year known as the queerindigo, kind of like a little name that I came up with. I am an 8 open heart surgery surviving queer human who owns a creative and experiential agency and is really inspired by community building and navigating the world through the most authentic way possible. As of course, learning every day what that authenticity is and expanding upon it. So not to say it's an end all be all, but it's just a forever kind of choice to walk as sort of intentfully and authentically as possible.
Yeah. Great answer. You're hired. That was a great answer. Okay, so as with all my interviews, we focus on one pivotal moment in your life. And of course, there are hundreds of pivotal moments in our lives, but we're going to kind of narrow it down to one moment. So I want you to take us to the before, what was going on before this moment, and then take us to the actual pivotal moment itself.
Yeah. So when you asked me this question and I was thinking through what it could be, there have been a few kind of bigger milestones in my life that resulted in extreme aha moments. And the one that I chose to talk about today was when I sort of owned my queer identity, because there was a point that I'm from Miami, Florida. And to give you a bit of a background, I come from Miami is a pretty diverse space. There's a lot of ethnicities and cultures and races of human beings that reside in that city, that travel in, that live there, that are from all over the world. And it truly is more of a salad bowl, quote unquote. I like to use that term instead of melting pot. I think it makes more sense as far as we haven't molded together. We're like different kinds of people living together in one space. And so in all of the beauty that comes from being born and raised in South Florida and being introduced to that, I was pretty free to explore sort of the G and the L, the gay and lesbian side of the LGBT, as we knew it growing up. And once I came out, which I never really did actually, someone outed me and I never really used the word gay, because even when I didn't know that other words existed, I never really held on to that word because it never really made sense. However, up until I was maybe in my early 30s, I was mostly visiting, supporting, and going to gay and lesbian owned spaces because I didn't really know that the queer world existed. I didn't have a comprehensive understanding about the umbrella of queerness as it is, inclusive of the continuum of gender identity and sexual orientation, and that there's this kind of wide scope and wide range of ways to identify that are inside of other, but not exclusive to gay. Mm-hmm. And after my 8th open heart surgery that I had when I was 26, I moved to New York City, and in my mind, I had always talked about, like, internally, if I can move to New York, it's the place I've always wanted to be free and to be open and to really be myself, then I'll be so happy. And when I got there, even though it was bigger and wider and there was more, everything was more, and I did enjoy my time there, and I do love New York, and I will never not love it, particularly Brooklyn. I still was uninspired by the fact that I kept running into the same kinds of people, or I shouldn't even say uninspired. It was kind of a rut, like what I wanted inside of what I was seeking, even though I didn't know the word, I sort of couldn't find it. And then years later, I moved to Atlanta, and then I started traveling to Berlin and also other cities in Europe. And when I was introduced to queer identity and queer culture, this is when I had this aha moment that was like, wow, there it is. You know, there's this other kind of sub. I mean, I don't even want to call it sub because we're all in the same continuum and we're all activating in the same space. But there's this sort of quote unquote subculture, if you will, that's like inside of this umbrella, like down there's this, and then there's this, and there's this. And once I learned about the intersectionality of queer identity and that it wasn't exclusive to one particular identity versus another, and that it was open, is when I kind of had this light bulb go off. That was like, oh, that's who I am. I'm a queer person, you know? And not that I'm someone who owns my labels in a way of bringing up those terminologies for my own self every day, years later, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but just to kind of connect it back to the words, is I'm someone who recognizes that the labels and words are important to people when you don't know that they exist. So the usage of them to introduce these ideas and concepts, and actuals, I should say actuals, because they're not really concepts, right? That these actual identities exist, I think I still kind of try to use them in a manner of conversations and educational purposes to introduce to other people what I didn't know. I consider myself kind of a late bloomer. And it wasn't until I had that aha moment that I really, all of the pieces of my life came together. So I was like, oh, I survived these surgeries and this is okay. And I'm not a cisgender, a cisgender homosexual male, and this is okay. I'm not someone who identifies, one really specific way. I can just be in my own skin, and I could learn about what all these definitions for terminologies and words mean, and I can own them and I can infuse them, and then I could dismiss them. Not dismiss them like make them go away, but they don't have to be on the front of my mind. They're now just part of my being. And this was a huge freeing experience for me because I've always been someone who lives pretty freely. I just kind of do what I want. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I really understand that tomorrow isn't promised. I know that we hear that a lot as people, but I get it because I've passed away a couple of times and I've had these, I've lived my life with this condition that has resulted in a different way of living. So once I was introduced and really owned my queer identity, all the light bulbs went off. I was like, oh, I could do anything. I really could be myself. I don't have to answer this way. I could really, truly stand behind how I thought that I was as a person, but now there's even more depth and more backing and more, I don't know, even I would say value that I had in myself once I owned the value that I had because I felt more complete and more whole.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so there's so much I want to unpack.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the time, and I'm sure there's not like one moment, but I want to go back to when you were younger and you find yourself not being able to be put into the already established sex of society, right? Yeah. So when are you kind of seeing that what you are seeing with your own eyes in your environment, you don't fit there? And how is that internal battle? How does that begin for you?
It happened from day one.
Really?
Yeah. So I have this memory lapse of certain things between the ages of like, I don't know, the 8 and 12 are a little blurry for me. And I did have like a surgery in 4th grade and one in 8th grade. And so I think like sort of between there, things were a little bit blurry as far as my specific recollection. But I pretty much have a strong memory. And I remember being 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old in hospitals, being highly attracted to the males, the nurses and the doctors that were coming in the room. So I recognized from an early age that I had some kind of emotional connection, or at least response to men. And for women, I didn't have the same thing. But I really understood, I like, or at least I can't say that I did, but in my mind, I thought that I really understood women, females, I should say, AFAB people, assigned female at birth is the better terminology, but we can use whichever for purposes of today, because going down a rabbit hole. But I like understood like a female's brain and the way that they kind of viewed the world. And so then in life, I always sort of recognized that or I didn't recognize it, what I learned from what I was seeing and taking from people, and this is going from like early till my early 30s, is I had this attraction to masculinity. And what I found over the years is I would be at, say, like an event or a party or even a lesbian bar, and there would be a more masculine person there who maybe was AFAB, who was hitting on me, and I was sort of uncomfortable because I was attracted to this person, but they weren't a boy. But I knew that that was okay, but I didn't get it because I thought that I was mostly attracted to masculinity, which in my mind tied to males, which in my mind tied to the fact that I was supposed to be gay, but I was uncomfortable because it didn't make sense, because then I would go to gay bars and I wasn't attracted to 99.9% of the people that were there. And not only attracted to them sexually, but like mentally, it was extremely unstimulating, the culture and the vibe and the people that I was coming across. And so I just for years would wind up holding in personal conversations out like 2 and 3 and 4 hour long conversations to explain to people what I now could sum up in 3 words, which is pansexual, mostly masked attraction to masked people, queer identifying, agender, own both of my genders or neither or both, or, you know, it's like what I was feeling was able to be explained through simplified manners, but I just didn't have the vocabulary and was confused all the time. You know, I was very attracted to trans men, but maybe didn't know that they were trans and thought that they were butch, quote unquote, butch lesbians. Because at the time I didn't even understand trans identity because I was like, wait, I'm so confused. So the floodgate opened when the floodgate opened. Actually, I started working in LGBTQ nightlife in 2010 when I moved back to Atlanta. And I began to realize that the events that I was throwing, they were attracting others, kind of the people that were sort of not typical. And I don't even want to use typical because that's so stereotypical. The people that were coming to the events that I was throwing were sort of people that didn't maybe feel welcome completely or whole in certain spaces, physical locations. And through that awareness and watching, I started understanding that I was more sort of in the gray. And then once I had these like big life lessons along the way, meeting certain people and having one-on-one conversations about these different identities, that everything kind of the floodgate opened one day. And I was like, oh my God, I totally get it. Snap of a finger, went from not getting it to like really getting it. And
what was the reaction of people that were around you, that were close to you, as you're kind of going on this journey to find your identity? And I'm sure it's a very unorthodox, because the way that you're describing it becomes this unorthodox way, because it's not, you know, we're always set on a path based on society, and you're going in a different direction. So tell me, what is the reaction and responses from people that are close to you that love you?
So initially, what is so interesting is me as a person. I've always, I recognized it always. I still recognize it today. Those that are closest to me develop a bit of like they're very defensive of other people around me, and I think it's because of my heart condition. Most people, the majority of people that I'm close with today, I've known upwards of 20 years and more, or 15 years and more. And they've always been kind of, there's like a little extra piece in there of them that's like protective. And I think that that leans into the fact that it gave them more room to either really, really see me for who I was as I was saying things, and or recognize and notice things that were different, that were maybe on intersectionally there also, in addition to my my heart condition. And what I found later is that people that were close with me, like that also didn't have the vocabulary, because we all sort of learned for the most part around the same time or of the same age group, where these words just weren't in our vocabulary. And in my 20s, it was like, you go to the gay bar, you know? All of them were like, we get it. Now it makes sense. We also didn't know those words. We didn't get it. Actually, someone that I'm really close with, my best friend's husband, said to me, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the exact quote, and this is like years ago. You know, he said when he first was having conversations with his mom, when he was explaining who I was as a person, a gay male, gay guy was brought up, and he was like, no, he's actually not a gay guy. He's sort of other. And I met his mom and later realized that she went back to him and was like, no, yeah, totally, something is other. So it's kind of like those check boxes were always there. And I'm not using other as like different as in less than. I'm using other than our interpretation of norm, or what we know to be, which is now I would say straight or gay. Now we're expanding that vocabulary to trans and bisexual and trans, you know, non-binary and genderqueer and what those mean. But and we're expanding upon our knowledge of those. But I guess other meaning the majority of people that we know that navigate the earth, at least for now, the way they identify, maybe because they don't have the terminology, is like straight or gay. And so what I've learned is that that group of individuals always saw me and knew me as other, but also in the same way that I didn't have those words.
Yeah.
It was of no surprise.
Yeah. How would you say that your heart condition and having these multiple open heart surgeries, which I'm sure like at a young age you're facing your mortality, how do you think having that condition and having those surgeries helped in your journey of self-identity?
So I was born with my condition, so it's all that I've ever known. I didn't realize that I was different in that sense until I was like, I think I sort of, if I think back to elementary school, I remember knowing, I know that could pick up that it wasn't everyone, but I didn't realize that I was the only, if that makes sense. I kind of was like, I just didn't get it. And then I really got it more in the summer of 7th to 8th grade, because that's when I had to have my one of my surgeries. I think it was number 7. And then in high school, I really got it. And I was like, oh, this is like really not, I'm the only one who has to go through this back and forth nonsense. So I don't know. I think that my condition led me to get that the theories that we talk about, like tomorrow might not come and no day but today and live your best self and live in the moment and all these things that people theoretically talk about, to me were not theories. Like I knew it. I like get it. So for in that sense, I think I was quite always unapologetic in my opinions and my delivery of what I saw and what I was receiving and just how I felt about the world. And yes, they were coming from a place of I knew a lot less then, so my opinions were probably formulated extremely on emotions and what I thought was based on conditioning of who was raising me, which is also a whole other conversation that we could have another day. I think the key to everything in life is completely unlearning everything you've ever known to be true to create your own path. So for me, I had this interesting, I guess, position of knowing that tomorrow might not come, being very outspoken, always kind of not caring what other people thought. And then once I really understood my identity, and then I sort of saw the world truly for what it was and not the way that people told us that it was, and traveled and saw the way that people are treated abroad, and just how the world navigates differently in different spaces, and how they are towards different groups of people, then I think it even became sort of more.
Yeah.
So I think it was always part of my identity. And then the more that I learn and the more information I absorb and the more injustice that I see, the more that I am enraged and the more that I want to become more of an activist, in the sense of kind of being the same person that I am, but being more intentfully outspoken about the wrongs that I see.
Yeah.
So it was kind of
Yeah, I want to touch on the last comment that you made, because I think that this conversation is valid not only in certain communities but in society in general, because all of us are going on this self-identity journey, right? Like, and some of us have been put in a box because we grew up in a certain way that said this is how your journey should look, right? So from the standpoint of really, like you are saying, unlearning and then going on your journey to discover how, and I'm sure this is a very complex answer,
yeah.
how did you go about unlearning, and then what kind of environments and what kind of information and resources are you using to empower yourself to then go on your own journey?
So I'll only talk about myself, not because I'm trying to be selfish about picking it back, and not because I don't want to give what other people could do, because this is such a specific journey that I think everyone takes, and it's different for everyone. And I think I'll share mine to see if maybe people can align with that. I always knew in my heart, in my head, every moment of it, since I could remember stepping my first step into a church, that this shit was fucked up. I literally remember sitting in what I call the audience, because that's the way that I view this, is that this person, and I went to Catholic churches when I was younger, this person is on a stage spewing whatever version and interpretation of words that were written in a book thousands of years ago, whenever it was written, because there's different, whatever the different sections, and just opting and deciding how they wanted to guide an entire audience of people to receive information and then put a footprint on the way that they navigate this world and this earth. And I was so insulted and disgusted, and I didn't have the words to use it. I just knew it in my being from head to toe. And I think I stopped going to church when I was like in 9th or 10th grade. I think like 9th grade. But I remember that I like during my confirmation classes in 8th grade, we used to have to go weekly to this teacher's house, and it was like group of 20 or whatever. And I would ask questions, everything that they would say, I would ask a question, and there was no answer ever. Nobody could ever answer the question. So I had this, I also identify as an indigo child, which I also later learned what that was. So I think it maybe ties in a bit, that I've always had this allergic reaction to automatic information that is just deemed correct and valid and right based on the person giving that information and based on the fact that someone is just older and wiser and is coming from a religious standpoint. So I had it in my being very early on. And I still have it, and this is a really fiery topic for me because I'm so insulted by the way that religion as a whole hides behind this mask of love and affection and spirituality, and not every religion, and I'm not saying every person, I'm saying just when you look at like the way that religion is formatted, the way that they sit on top and so righteously, like they're doing such wonderful things and they're just spewing this into people, and there's so much I don't know negativity that winds up as the result of the telephone game coming out. So for me, knowing that and being really allergic to that from an early age, it was already there. And so this reaction to other people telling me what to do and telling me what was right, I was always questioning authority. I was always pushing back. I was always questioning what information that I received. But at the same time, some information was still coming in. It was still in there, and it slipped by and it was stuck. And so for me, it was a journey of the constant internal reminder of like seeing a situation and like really viewing it for what it was and really being like, that's a no thank you for me. And then opting and deciding to hyper focus on breaking down what was a no thank you for me and what about it. And my yearning to travel, I always had it. So a big breaking point for me was traveling, getting out of the country, getting a passport and leaving. going to Europe and spending 3 months in different cities and meeting different people and hearing their perspective on our country and the perspective of people that live culturally differently and what their religions are or aren't and how they are similar or different, and meeting individual people that have walked past this way, that have done this and gone here and learned this. And so my whole life has been a learning curve, but particularly getting out of the country. Yeah. That was the biggest point where I was able to view our country outside of it and how people saw it and hold those individual conversations, but at the same time, see the way that their society was working and seeing how they navigate their lives as a culture, and then specifically LGBTQ people in that culture and how they're navigating it, was the most eye-opening experience that I've ever had. Yeah. And that was really what connected a lot of the dots when other little seeds were planted.
Yeah.
So yeah, and my biggest thing, and I said all the time, and I know that a lot of people are really triggered by this and they get really angry about it. And I'm always happy to have the conversation on a deeper level. But the unlearning 101, lose your religion. I'm not saying that you won't eventually revisit it. I'm not saying that you might wind up falling in love with it again. I'm not saying that you might find connections to certain pieces of it. But what I'm implying is remove your religion from the slate that this is what you need to do to live your life in a way that's joyful and fulfilled and the way to get to the gates of heaven. Literally, you have to let that go completely and start on a slate of viewing the world through your own lens, the way that you know it to be true, and then build the building blocks of what you feel is right based on that. Because I can say that I've met some people that have done that, and some of them have gone back to a bit of maybe not religious living, but ties to the religion that they had, but they removed all of the hate and all the negativity and all of the sort of the imprints of things that made them feel that there was a rule book to life that made them live a certain way in order to achieve something. Yeah. And that's the most freeing and liberating thing that someone can do.
Yeah, I love that. So 2 more questions. I want to focus on, just from the pivotal moment, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you learned? So from that whole experience of really finding your identity, I guess we can say, what was the big lesson for you?
I think, honestly, the biggest lesson is the validation that living authentically and freely is truly the only way to live. And really the lesson is to just be. We don't need to feel confrontational and ready to attack and fight with every topic that arises. We don't need to feel like we have to involve ourselves in everyone's everything. We don't need to feel as though that we need to put on a face mask and buy expensive earrings and put on something specific because the world will be attracted to it or will respond to it. We don't have to do those things. When you get to a point that you can truly live freely in your being, you will find that you no longer care about what other people think. And this is the time that the shift comes from power of others to power of self, and it goes like this. It just shifts. And you become, and I don't know really how to break this down, but I think that the way that we use this word, I think people will get it. You become a light. You become lighter. You become a light. Because people are connected energetically, and you can see in someone when there's positivity and sort of acceptance and love as the entity that's presenting, versus feeling every day like you're going through the motions of a protective mechanism to wake up in the morning. Like, I can't imagine how exhausting and tiring that it must be for someone to wake up in the morning and the first thought on their mind is like, I have to get into character, which might not be the word that they say, but it's what they're doing. I have to get into character to live my day. I have to put on this particular outfit and this particular jewelry and drive this particular car and stop at this particular coffee shop, and because all of it is a show and all of it is a facade. That must be so tiring.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just live freely and openly and authentically.
Yeah. So, last thing, I want you, so someone that may be watching this, I think that there's so many connections between what you've learned in the LGBTQ community, but also just in general, this idea of finding identity and removing yourself from the shoulds, from almost like you just said, waking up and feeling like you have to put on to present yourself to the world. So I want you to talk directly to somebody who's watching this, who is putting on, who feels the pressure to get up and be somebody and is desperately searching for themselves and desperately searching for identity and authenticity. What can you say to them, either to encourage them or to give them some strategies to help them along the way?
Honestly, stop doing that. And really, I know that that might sound like the most simplified version, but stop doing that. And the reason I say that is because you, like, when it comes to life, when we talk, when we say with words, when we speak out loud, I one day I will move. One day I will have that. I wish I could have that. I want that. What you're not doing is you're allowing an 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 amount of time that is what am I trying to say? I'm trying to simplify this down because I don't know if I've ever like sort of expressed this with words. It's like you're allowing for room of time with no end date to it for something to maybe happen in your life maybe later. You just have to do what you say you're going to do. So it's I will move. I am. I am. I am. I am. I am. And so my thing about people is like it's not a gradual thing. You don't need to think about it as an 8-step long program to get out of your head. Stop doing that. Look in the mirror and talk to yourself and say, today I am myself. That's it. And what you will find is that all of the steps that you thought that you had to say to get there, those will happen because you're saying, I'm not doing that anymore. So the steps will happen naturally for you because your decision making in your day will be different about what you accept, what is okay for you, and what you will or won't do. It will become your reaction instead of the strategic plan to identity. Just stop doing that. Stop living that way. Stop being that way. We are all born knowing. You already know who you are. Yes, we grow as adults and we have more comprehensive understanding of what we know. But when we think back to what we knew when we were younger, we already knew. We knew what our gifts were. We knew what our abilities were. We knew where our skill set lied. And then the world honed it, right? Like we either if you took a traditional path, you went to school. If you took an untraditional path, or I'm using those words for societal norms, not because I think so. An untraditional path, you didn't go to school, but you still knew. And connecting back to thinking about and feeling through who you were when you were younger, what you wanted, what was important, I bet you'll find that those things are still the same today. They're just now achievable because you're able to execute them. And the way to execute them and live your truth is to just stop and halt in your track and stop doing that. And then the unlearning will begin naturally.
I love it. Yes, Barry, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this value, your vulnerability, your wisdom, your experience. I gained so much, and I know so many people have. Tell us, how do we get more of you? How do we see the incredible things that you're doing? Because what you're expressing in words, I feel like you're expressing in visuals and just so many great things on your social media. So tell us, how do we get more of you?
Yeah, so my agency is called For All Humans. I guess now it might make a little bit more sense now that we've broken down my life.
Right.
I own a creative and experiential agency with one of my best friends. So we do marketing and branding and brand identity, and we also create and produce experiential events for brands and businesses. And a lot of it has to do, the reason a lot of people enjoy working with us is because we have a voice of diversity and inclusion that we intentfully, strategically sort of place upon the footprint of their brand. So you can check out the business at forallhumans.co. And then my website for myself is thequeerindigo.co. And I am at the Queer Indigo on all social. So mostly TikTok and Instagram. Mostly Instagram is where I post, but I'm across social platforms. And that's where people can check out those walk videos.
Oh, they're awesome.
If they haven't seen them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those walk videos are. I think they're a good representation of a way to be visible and be inclusive, and to kind of represent a visual for some of the words that I've talked about today. Or so
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much again, Barry. Thank you to all of you who have watched and who have taken part in this story. And